I was just going to go right back to the very beginning with this, Tom, is that, Jim. You knew Tom Savini from college, I understand, and then you went into the military together with him. Is that right?
That's correct. We were at Point Park University now. And after we left college, we were both in journalism program. Tom went into the Army as a combat photographer, and I went in as a combat medic. We both
So
ended up in Vietnam and then reconnected once we got back to Pittsburgh after a couple of years.
was that when you got back together, was that in relation to Dawn of the Dead, or was that
Yes,
just
it was.
So as a medic, you must have seen some pretty gruesome stuff here in Vietnam. I'm just wondering if you gave any sort of anatomical advice to Tom on his what he came up with.
No, Tom had his own imagination, and I believe when George asked Tom to work on special effects before he made the movie, he said, "Tom, how many different ways can you think of to kill people?" And Tom suggested, "Oh, maybe 100 or so." And George said, "Oh, that'll be fine." So I know that he already had a lot of ideas in mind. And I only got together with Tom for my makeup sessions and then on set for a couple of days at the airport. So I didn't really have a chance to, as you say, provide advice. I was actually trying to stay away from that sort of thing.
Fair enough, fair enough. So actors always sort of say about the problems they have beforehand when they're going into the workshop for the effects to be made, the casts and whatnot. Because this was, I guess, would have been a head cast on yourself. Did you have, or what did Tom put you through? It must have been problematic, I would imagine, or claustrophobic to have built it.
I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen when we were in Tom's workshop. And he said, "Well, we'll put this layer of alginate. It's like a flexible plastic kind of material that conforms to all the grooves and lines and contours of your face. But you'll have to breathe through a straw because we'll have to cover everything over." And he said, and then once that firms up, then we have to cover all of that with plaster. So he did the front half of my face and then the back half of the head so he could make a complete bust by putting the two pieces together. During the course of that process, yes, it is claustrophobic. It took at least half an hour or so just breathing through a straw. So you have to be very trusting of the person you're working with. And I was very relieved, I might say, once that makeup session was done, until about 2 days later when Tom gave a call and said, "Jim, we have to do it again. The plaster cracked." So he had to mix up another batch of plaster. We went through the whole process again. And I thought, I hope I never have to do that again. But yeah, it can be quite claustrophobic, yes.
So I understand that with your scene, you had a couple of days on set. Can you talk me through those couple of days? Because my understanding is right from when the you're having your makeup applied right through to the scene itself, which I understand Tom directed more than George did because of everything having to hit cues at the right moment.
That's correct. It was a matter of pretty precise timing for especially for some of Tom's effects. So George chose people well, and he made sure that Tom had free rein to get the timing done on some of the effects, including mine. So in that regard, Tom directed those scenes. I arrived on set not quite knowing what to expect. My first time at that location, this little remote rural airport. And I looked around and didn't see a helicopter. And I didn't see it for the entire first day. But I did get to watch the other scenes being shot. And so I got some inside looks at what was happening in the little airport building with Ken Faree coming through and the kids being shot up in that location. And we basically had to stay out of the way. There weren't other locations where we could kind of hide as a group or the makeup room. So we just kind of had to keep the doors closed and peek through the corners as we could when they were shooting inside. As they shot outside, we got to stand outside at times or look through the windows and get to see what the rest of the movie was going to be looking like. On the second day, it was still a bit of drizzly rain, and the helicopter did arrive, however. And I don't know if they were shooting late, but I just kept my fingers crossed that we would actually be able to do the scene. You know, regardless of a shooting schedule or budget, you have to get from point A to point B in a certain time frame. And
Yeah.
hopefully you get all of your shooting done at point A before you have to move to point B. So you're never really quite sure how that's going to work. But when I was called on to set, I did say, hey, Tom, because I hadn't had a chance to see Tom much beyond arriving. So I said, Tom, do these zombies talk? And he said, well, you know, you can do whatever you want to do, but generally not. So I, you know, did some moans and things of that nature, which I thought seemed appropriate for my character. Whether they actually used any of that, I don't know, or if it was just cut in afterward. It's a little hard to determine because it was outdoors. George directed the scene of my coming out from under the airplane wing and walking across the field. And when we got to the boxes near the helicopter where I was to step up, as in the scene behind me here, the action really sort of switched over to Tom, and the sequence of what was going to happen was in his hands. And George sort of stood back and watched it unfold. Everything came across in one shot. George looked very pleased and just had a big beaming smile, so I knew we'd hit it. We did have, by the way, a second change of clothes in case we did have to do a reshoot, but fortunately that was not necessary, and I was very happy to have it done and to have kind of carried it off without embarrassing myself. But in a sense, after all that anticipation and excitement, it's a bit of a letdown to say, oh, that's it.
That's it.
I'm done.
Yeah. This was you know, it's quite well known. This was a low budget movie, and the stories that Christine, George's wife, had said about that, you know, all the supporting artists who played zombies were, you know, it was $1 and a donut was that yourself?
No, I did a little better than that. And
Okay.
I haven't really, actually, I haven't really told anybody what that has been, but I'll tell you. This will be a first, okay?
Okay.
Tom made sure that I got $25 for each of the makeup sessions and $75 for each day on set.
Rich man.
Well, as a starving artist, and it helped me get some extra of those donuts.
So what was your family's reaction to all of this when the film came out, or when they got to see the film?
Well, I wasn't married at the time, although my then girlfriend, my now wife, Linda, was actually at Tom's workshop with me for the makeup session, and you know, well received. But the rest of the family, I would say, didn't really respond much, and even my daughters, after a number of years, still weren't too impressed. But I think what really sort of set it off, my older daughter was in college, and she said, Dad, when you come in this weekend for a visit, my boyfriend wants to meet you. I said, well, okay, sure, why not? And when I met my daughter, Melissa, and knock at the door, there's her boyfriend and 2 or 3 other guys, and they're kind of wide-eyed and say, Mr. Krut, you were the helicopter zombie in Dawn of the Dead? And I said, yes. Well, I think from that point on, my older daughter really got the idea that it was kind of a fun thing to have a dad who was in Dawn of the Dead, especially as a featured zombie.
So you had like a certain degree of anonymity for a long time after this.
Mm-hmm.
When did people start recognizing you? Was it when you did the documentary about Dawn of the Dead back, I think it's about 2004? Was that when you started getting recognized, and how were you tracked down?
Well, that's an interesting story because I was working in theater in Pittsburgh for about 7 years during that period of time. And Pittsburgh was just starting to become a film center. But because we just had our first child, and Pittsburgh was kind of an industrial city with a lot of smog and pollution from the steel mills, I decided I wanted to raise our daughter in a cleaner rural environment. So we moved. And that put me in a different situation in terms of employment. So I was working as a weekly newspaper editor for a couple of years. I became a magazine editor for a statewide publication in Pennsylvania, and a number of other things, which eventually took me to Harrisburg, the state capital. And in about the year 2000, I was tracked down by someone I knew from Pittsburgh who said, "We're doing a Dawn of the Dead reunion convention in Cleveland, Ohio, and we'd like to have you there. It's called Cinema Wasteland." And I said, "Really? Somebody would want to see me?" I couldn't understand it. I really couldn't understand it. And they said, "Oh yeah, they'll take care of your hotel and your transportation, and they'll even feed you." That's all I needed to hear. So, 8 hours later, so I was in Cleveland at this convention, and I got a chance to meet all the folks I'd worked with in the film. You have to understand that, again, Pittsburgh was more of a theater city than it was a film city. So a number of the folks I'd worked with in theater had also worked in Dawn of the Dead. So like David Crawford and David Early, some of those folks, Nick Tallow I'd gone to college with also, Tom Savini. So it was in many ways just a joyful reunion, and to have people come up from all over the United States, someone who'd flown in from Japan for this reunion, and I was just really totally blown away by it. From that, somebody said, "Hey, I'm doing a convention in Pittsburgh. Would you come to that one?" So I went to that one. From there, I just started doing conventions for about the next 20 years, bringing us up to date.
Uh-huh. I was
Then,
just one. Oh, sorry, George, go on.
Pardon?
Sorry, go on. I was interrupting. Sorry.
Yeah, I didn't really get back into film until I saw an opportunity because of my work schedule. I was on call 24 hours in my communications situation. So I saw an audition for a part, and I went to the audition, and it was an independent film in the Harrisburg area. And I got in there a little bit late. I filled out the paperwork, and they said, "Oh, well, come on right in. We're just finishing up." So I went in, and before they even read the paperwork, they said, "We'd like you to read these lines." So I did the lines, and they said, "You'd be perfect for this role and such and such." And I thought, "Oh, well, that's fine. Just let me know when and where." Then I got a call later that night from the director, who must have just read the sheet, and said, "I didn't know you were the helicopter zombie in Dawn of the Dead. That's fantastic."
You're hired.
You're hired. But I'd already been hired before that, which, truly is, a mark of pride in that you're not just hired because of past reputation, but what you're doing now. It's not what you've done, it's what you can do now. And so I appreciated that moment. And then from there, I've done probably another 20, 25 films.
I've got very little time left now, Jim. So I was just going to ask you two more questions. Your death is seen as an iconic one in the first film. In the remake that they did, were you ever approached about recreating that for the remake, Zack Snyder's version?
No, I know there were a lot of kudos and references to some of the previous characters and actors in the original Dawn of the Dead, but I was not. Whether, of course, I was not listed as credit on the original. I was an uncredited role. So I've been able to make my own way through the world without that bit of recognition there. And apparently a few folks have picked up on that. So I'm pleased.
And then finally, what are your last memories of George? The last time that you saw him?
The last time I saw him was probably 30 years after the making of the dead, because on that scene at the airport, that was, and the premiere that we went to, that was the last time I saw George in person, up close, because again, I'd moved away from Pittsburgh, and um, we got together at a convention, and it was a room full of folks from Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Land of the Dead. And I looked around at these rooms full of people with Romero actors, and I realized all of this is because of George Romero, and how wonderful it was that he created this entire family. And his line to see him and get his autograph started hours before he even showed up. So I had to wait until like the evening of the second day before I could approach him, because we were in different rooms. And when I went over to see him, I went to introduce myself, and he just smiled and he just gave me a great big hug because he recognized me, and I was just thrilled. And it was just a very touching moment for me. I got one of those great big teddy bear hugs from George, and that was special.
Thank you very much for your time, Jim. Really grateful. I wish you all the best. Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me. Keep the dead alive.
Thank you.